class. Today we're going to be talking about graphing linear equations on a coordinate plane using a table. Before we get into that though, we need to take a look at what a coordinate plane is and how it's organized. You'll notice that this coordinate plane I have drawn here has a few things involved in it. There is a horizontal number line here, and there is also a vertical number line here. Where the two cross, right here, is where both of them are considered to be 0. That is what we call the origin. And that is a point where the x and the y coordinate are both 0. So it's written as the point 0, 0. Notice we have parentheses with the two numerical values with a comma in between them. That is what we call an ordered pair here, where you have parentheses and then the x coordinate is always first, the y coordinate is always second, and they're separated by a comma. You can remember which coordinate is first and which is second by just thinking about the alphabet. X comes first in the alphabet, so it's first in the coordinate plane. Now, when you're taking a look at this coordinate plane and how it's set up, what I want you to imagine is an old-fashioned map that you might be taking a look at in order to figure out where to go if you didn't have a navigation system in your car. If you had that map folded out, you would notice that on one side of the map you would have letters, and on the other side you might have numbers. And if you look in the legend for the city you're looking for, it'll give you a number and a letter. So you would find your number on one side and your letter on the other side, and then you would go to where they cross, and that's where your city would be. The same thing happens on your coordinate plane, except rather than having numbers and letters, you have two numbers, an x and a y. So what you would do is if you are told to find the point 2, 3, the 2 would be your x, so you'd find 2 on the x-axis, and the 3 would be your y, so you'd find y on 3 on the y-axis, and then you would go over until the 2 cross, and that's your location for where your point is going to land. In this case, for 2, 3, it lands right here. And normally you put a dot there for that location, and then you label it with the coordinates. Now, when you're plotting points, you can already kind of tell where the point's going to land based on the signs of the coordinate. Because if you look at your axes, where they cross is 0, and going the direction you read, the x-axis, it has all the positive values and it gets larger, just like a number line. Going the opposite direction from the 0, the values get smaller, and that's the negative side of your number line. On the y-axis, where it crosses the x-axis, is 0, and going up is positive, and you would think of going up as being positive, and they get larger as you go up. Going down, they get negative, and they get smaller and more negative as you go down, which makes sense because you think of down as being negative. So if you look at all the values over here in this section of the coordinate plane, all of the values here will have a positive x and a positive y. This section over here is called quadrant 1. You'll notice that the coordinate plane and these two axes divide the surface into 1, 2, 3, 4 sections. And quad means 4, so this is a quadrant because it is one of the 4 sections. So over here, we would call this quadrant 1. We use Roman numerals to name them. And in this quadrant, the x values are always positive and the y values are always positive. So knowing that this was 2, 3 and they were both positive, I already knew it was going to land over here. Now, as we name our quadrants, we go counterclockwise. So this is quadrant 2. And in this quadrant, the x's are all negative and the y's are all positive. So if I have something with a negative x and a positive y, I already know it's going to land over here. For instance, if I have negative 3, 1, negative 3 is here, going up 1, I land right here. And that's the location for negative 3, 1. Continuing around, this section here is quadrant 3. And in this section, the x's are negative and so are the y's. So it's negative x, negative y. So if I have the point negative 5, negative 3, that's negative 5, and then down 3, it's located right here. And our final quadrant is over here, quadrant 4. And for this quadrant, all of the x values are positive and the y values are negative. So we'll have a negative, positive like that. Or excuse me, positive, and then negative. There we go. Like you see here. So if we had the point 6, negative 4, that's 6 on the x, and then down to negative 4, which is right here. And we would land right about there with 6, negative 4. So that's how the coordinate plane is set up, and it's sometimes called the Cartesian coordinate plane. And that's how you locate points on the coordinate plane. Notice that whenever the y value is 0, we will be on the x-axis. And whenever the x value is 0, we will be on the y-axis. Now, let's go ahead and take a look at how we graph a line on this type of a coordinate plane. The first way we're going to look at graphing lines is by using a table. And when you're using a table, most equations will have your y value by itself, and then it'll give you a formula for how to find that y value, and in that formula it will have the x in it. And you might have something like 1/4 x minus 2. Now, you might be asked to graph this using a table. The tables that I found work the nicest for students is a table with 3 columns. And in the first column, you'll put your x values. And in the second column, you'll put your y values. And in the third column, you write the ordered pair that you're going to actually graph, which is your x and your y. Now, when you are choosing what to put in your table, we normally pick the x values because those are what we're going to plug into the formula. If you are not given x values for your particular situation, I would choose values that the denominator of the fraction, if there is a fraction in front of the x, you want to choose ones that the denominator of that fraction divide into evenly. So we have 4 here. I want to pick small numbers that are divisible by 4. And normally we need at least 2 points to know where the line is, and it's good to have at least 3 in order to make sure that you calculated everything correctly. So I'm going to use negative 4 because 4 goes into that. I'm going to use 0 because it's the easiest thing to plug into any formula. And then I'm going to use 4 because 4 goes into 4. And then I'm going to calculate out my y's by plugging these into the formula. So for the first one, I'm going to plug in negative 4. And the first thing I do is notice this is over 1, so I cross cancel. 4 goes into negative 4, negative 1 time. 1 times negative 1 is negative 1. When I subtract 2, I get negative 3. So this y value is negative 3, and that corresponds to the point negative 4, negative 3. Now, let's go ahead and plug in our second x value and find out our second point. So plugging in 0, I get y equals 1/4 times 0 minus 2. And 0 times 1/4 is just 0, so I can make that disappear, and y ends up being negative 2. So I plug in that in my table there, and that's corresponding to the point 0, negative 2. Now, let's calculate our last point. So we're going to plug in a 4 for my x. And I notice again this 4 is over 1. These 4's cancel to make 1. 1 times 1 is just 1. And when I subtract 2, I get negative 1. So that gives me a point of 4, negative 1. What I need to do now that I have 3 points is I need to create a coordinate plane, and I need to plot all 3 points and then connect them to make a line. So I'm going to label my axes. I have the x and the y axes, and then you need to label a few points. I always put my value on each fifth one if they're going up by ones. You can make the little tick marks go up by twos. You'd need to label them as 2, 4, 6, 8, and so on. If you're going up by ones, labeling every fifth one is fine. Just so you know the scale between the dashes. So now let's look at our first point here. That's negative 4, negative 3. So I need to go to negative 4 and then negative 3, which lands right there. So let's go ahead and plot that and then label it. The second point I found was 0, negative 2, which is right here. So let's plot that and label it. And then the third point I found was 4, negative 1. And 4, negative 1 lands right there. So let's plot that and label it. Now that I have my points, I just need to connect them, and there is your line. So that's how you go about graphing lines using a table. Basically, just if you're not given x values to plug in, choose these x values. Choose them strategically so that if this value is a whole number, you want to choose x values that the denominator will divide into and make them small numbers so your graph doesn't have to be that large. And then calculate your y's, write your ordered pairs, plot them, and connect them on your coordinate plane.